Okay, what am I doing? That's close on this one does. You guys are being silly. Okay. Shuktan and okay, so Nipa Sumba Gebe Tsu.
Somebody give it 10 us.
Okay. And Sumba Tela Dobe. Okay, so for everybody online in the English text, we are on page, and for you guys, we are on page 75, F2, the measure of the practice of the path of a person of the small scope. Hey, welcome back. Thanks for coming back. Kung nguma di tima mambo.
Ale.
Yung song.
Ale.
Di lo tangbo. Chide ki lo tangbo la.
Ale.
Kung nguma di tima mambo. I was just reminding him that you've come before that a couple of years ago. You came the first year for Chide. You came a lot.
아니 단단가서 무지 마시게 가서 해마 Paula Tsewang 평소.
Oh, did they?
Dila.
Oh, there was a question online. Somebody had a question online. I didn't translate, and now I don't have the question. I'm so sorry.
Ko Tsewang karutorelana. Ko pes kesinga mijimba jingala control nosona. Ani nga zoba gane. Ani ngala pento chimbo yores. Tinde yesoza. Hosho control longa jiora. Ko jilani gewa yores. Gewa yores.
Okay. So Geshe is going to address. We're going to address the question that you raised last time. That this idea that so if someone gets mad at me, right, that gives me this opportunity to practice patience, right? So doesn't that mean that this person getting mad at me actually is practicing virtue because they've given me this opportunity to actually do something good? Was that was your question? Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question.
Oh, tindichi yores.
Go to Pachila.
Pena, Yaramchik sonch so yora. Ina nganda which Yaramchik and Zema Shangu, Congo Gondo, Colama Yapomare, Jenny, Tindisaulish Tone, Nanda was Tindisauliton de Basagra. Not de Basagra. Ina yote, Yaramchik la Duba Yoreti Omares.
So, if we say, for example, that His Holiness is giving a Dharma teaching, right? And that Dharma teaching, someone, say I, for example, I'm listening to this Dharma teaching, and I start getting really angry and think he's lying, he's being stupid, really thinking that this is really dumb, So my reaction to his Dharma teaching is a negative action, right? We'd say dikpa, it's like a misdeed, I start. Does that mean that His Holiness also committed a misdeed? Yeah, so these are the same. We can use these as an example like this. It's the same sort of situation to understand. Yeah, so on the one hand, one is you're talking about something good, and the other hand, you're talking about something bad. But otherwise, the sort of relationship there is the same. Like what happens is the same. Does that make sense?
I have to think about it.
So
if it doesn't make sense, I will ask again.
Well, so what he said was, right? You do something bad to me, right? And then but it gives me an opportunity to practice patience, right? So does that make what you did good? Versus, say you do something good for me, but my reaction is negative, does that make what you did bad? That's it.
No. Okay. No. Yeah. Okay.
이나 단다 지와텔 저를 먹고 단다 토파티 지와텔 토파 마세나 야요레스 저를 서울로 몸부터
예.
대몸부터 수로 편도요레스
Yeah.
그래서 캐트 토파티 세서나 아니 시라 좋아요.
Yeah, it's really wonderful though that this kind of doubt that you speak this and talk about this. This is really how we learn. This is really important for people to, when these kind of doubts, questions arise, to ask them and to talk about them so that we can answer them and think about them. So it's really good for you to bring this forward.
라. 아니 다 아서 무스 단다 되는 맛이야. 뒤지는데. 저도.
Would you at some point sneak a photo? We haven't done photos in a while, any level. Yeah.
아니 당 가서 그냥 아니 리준데도 텐저 몸부 셰사라스. 아니 따뜻 뒤서 리준데도 향하실라. 사울은 코알라 아니 니바 삼바티 집이 채너는 딘데 사울은 코아게 채너버티 간디자고레 라나스.
The nipati sampate gibete. Getting Christensen?
니바 삼바티 집이 채다 가서 가서 거는 건조살라 이치도 리준데 몸부 셰라. 따뜻서 리준데 사울로 야버티 수수jel을 깨바도 아니 건조살라 이치내메 사울로 간디 So
here we're in F2, the measure of the practice, the path of a person of the small scope. So this here it says, for someone who has a genuine desire to live this worldly existence, who has an intellectual understanding of life and advancement should happen where this life after becomes the main objective. So previously we talked a lot about karma and afflictions. We sort of summarized the section in this book, this karma and afflictions. We talked about refuge and how to take refuge in generating faith. And so this is just a summary, right? If through those practices, right, then you sort of generate this mind that is the path of the path of a person of the small scope. And by small scope, remember, we mean their sort of motivation is small.
아니 다 ngaso 사울로 간지 동거래잖아. 내가 사울로 동토도 단다 사울로 동토더니 지무전에 내가 간지 사울로 또 ngaso 신든 지텐디 이 좀바 그 자와 좀바 저 단다 바데 파테레스 니 기와 참아도 치시마잖아 ngaso 시에가 요래디 이나요 디 저촌사스 저촌라나 네 당가서 텐다수 마체바 텐다수 신데제 치시마티 텐다 총총데 제네 ngaso 냐올레 제가 이 추더고요 전에 타바르 시에가 이나 주 신들라 아니 좀바 디 좀바를 살로톤데 치시마트 미 타니자 좀바마토 아니 살로톤요 말레스 딘데서 다 ngaso 티 살로디 지모자네 치시마트 수제네 치시마트 기아치마라 펜빌레카 가르고는 텔 살로 주토네 신디 요 된 총총라지 살로 지모자네 돈토티 셰요레스.
So if we were to summarize this section here about what's happening, right? So we're talking about sort of the person who's going through this process of the Lamrim, and the person before this small scope, most of us, the way we spend most of our lives, right, is that we're really thinking mostly about this life. Whatever practice we do really is about this life. We might talk about valuing the future life. We might think about the future life, but it's really just words mostly for us, right? And then as you become a practitioner of the small scope, right, what happens is the emphasis on this life and then sort of maybe thinking about future lives occasionally it starts to shift. And so you begin to really emphasize your future lives much more. That becomes the main focus of your practice. Good migrations, having benefit in future lives. And this life becomes less emphasized, right? So you begin to truly value your future lives more than this life.
안다 된 기아치마야도 신도 돈이 총아지라잖아. 어디 살루티 맞서 예름보 강지체 리준지도 또 살로몬보 또 예름보 니마도 루다와티사 몬보 살루토나 아니 인디 살루티 기아 요사라모도 맞서 카르트 인디 살루티 기초초지 말았어.
So this kind of transformation in our thinking, right, is not something we do immediately or quickly, right? This is the kind of transformation that takes we have to go through this thinking process and these things over and over again in our minds every day, every year, over years, right? You slowly, over and over again, you go through this thinking process, and through that you begin to change your mind. But it's not a quick process.
네, 아빠 텐데 사울에 제와라 가서 제와메 타바고 아니 리준데를 사울 몸보 또나 네 칼레 칼파리 신데도 참아냐네 참아테 수 제와메 타도 리준데를 사울 또라 텐데 몸보 또나 가서 신디 된다 청청 제와 참아 된다 침보연 바치 아니 람비치네 네.
So through really thinking over and over again about karma and the effects of karma, through thinking over and over again about what we call death and impermanence, right, which is the sort of things that we talked about in the previous classes, that we could die at any time, with death is certain, right? Meditating on those concepts over and over and over again. Oh, we still have internet, that's good. Then you begin to slowly shift this emphasis, this balance, from this really focusing on this life to begin to focus on your next lives, your future lives.
Aneta sacha sambate samba loto sawazan loto ti karerezena ane sonje ko sonra ti sona ane khawala nginjo ke gore khawala neya yomarezen momboso yores indi kachi ke ane ngaso jewa chama ngonto mi kompo thawajiora ti on khawaren indi soza mi kompo thawate poncha isare ten ne tindi loto yores ti loto servicheta ani jewa chama ngonto mi kompo thawat ngaso betso che gores.
Okay. So now F3, eliminating misconceptions on the path, right? So here the first thing that it talks about is this idea that, we're still online, yeah, that's good. In the scriptures, the Buddha talks a lot about the idea of renunciation, about sort of trying to about samsara and the suffering of samsara and abandoning, sort of being attached to the suffering of samsara. And so thinking this way, you can begin to think, oh, well, even like these good rebirths, these higher rebirths, I need to avoid those and shun those. And that's true in the long run, but in the short run, we need to achieve these higher rebirths so that we actually have the opportunity to practice. So in the short term, achieving higher rebirths is actually an important thing to do.
Ne ngaso mi litet sach ani tonye chegu bi jinsa kararezen mi litendala ani chichi lishi sonji ji kompo tabo ki nibayo wato mi litejora ngaso mi liten okay chichi lishi la sonji kompo tabi nibayo ani chudana ni chushu chimbo da ya chama tabata ati lite yasha mi litegres.
And so achieving a human rebirth, achieving the sort of the basis of a human form is the more literal translation of the Tibetan. But so we need this form, we need this human rebirth, we need this human basis, because this is the most useful basis for actually practicing Buddhism and achieving Buddhahood. So it's important for us to really practice such that we get a human rebirth, so that we can practice the path and achieve Buddhahood.
Ne chato hai liteto tandanga mi liteto ngonto mi kompo hato mi kompo tabazara hai liteto chato chuda koka kashi yosa yores inayo monchijatela yomar ndolan rejena chudo dola tisola ni chuda koka meama sono mombu chisane hai litelegres yenayo kuzo litendelane sono ngamasato pecho tone sono tepa masaje ane jimangendo to nyawachiat dilhai moayores.
So when we talk about the good rebirths, of course, we also can talk about what gets translated as gods, which is a strange term if you're not used to it. But you can be born as these sort of long life gods, or these gods in these higher realms. And so there's the desire god realm, and it's very possible for people to. It's not common, but it's possible for people to accumulate enough virtue to be born as a desire realm God. And the problem with this, of course, is that while you're there, you don't accumulate any more virtue. And then when that karma expires, you just go straight to a hell realm.
네 밀리텐도 다자톰바 단다가 선지와 선지 사자 타바데요 밀리텐고라네 선지바도네 zukudrabares zuki코텐디
Zuki.
zuku요
Zuku.
zuki코
The meal in la dinner.
밀리텐 라테네 소사 드바죠 게롱고 담바죠 밀리텐 선지바 res.
So, for example, the Buddha, on the basis of being born when he achieved enlightenment through the basis is like through being born as a person, right? So the Buddha was born as a person. He practiced the path. He had realizations. He became a monk. He meditated. He did all of these things, and then became a Buddha as being born as a person.
안에다 다자탐바 선지야 밀리텔 선지자들 제또 시소마라니요레스. 시소마라니.
아, 네네.
네, 지카르잖아. 아주 동분이는 미 가서 나오지에 갈리 소사 잡아줘야 선지야. 요 지도 선체가 쳇다니 잡아텐 내가만 선지제나요. 잡아텐에 그래서 선지나 된지지 거래잖아. 탈라테 된지셔서 말하니.
There's sort of two ways of telling this story about how the Buddha achieved enlightenment. And one way of talking about it is this idea that the normal way we think of the Buddha was born as a person on this earth, went through the stages of practice, and became a Buddha. And this is sort of what we would say, like the Pali tradition talks about. The Mahayana tradition, or the Sanskrit tradition, really says that the Buddha achieved enlightenment eons and eons ago, and he actually sort of projected himself as a person in this life and manifested these actions for our benefit, to show us the path.
티시 안에 다디 아주 사체티 교토모 교원데도 토모 람바 두조알라 지자죠. 디체 니바 교원데도 토모 란제람발로
아, 네, 동의도.
네, 삼바 조잉우체 아니 이 사체티 소마시아이스.
Okay, so now we're going to move down here to training in the state. It's E2 on page 77 in the English. Training the mind in the stages of the path shared with a person of the medium scope, which has 4 parts. Actual mind training in the practice of a person of a medium scope. The measure of the practice of the path of a person in the medium scope. Eliminating misconceptions about the path and establishing the nature of the path leading to liberation. If anyone ever wants the Tibetan pages, by the way, or the Tibetan text, let me know.
안에다 삼바 조잉우자 사체 tombote 엘라니 타바토니체 루무조 티키비 타자 사체니와지라 네타 tombo 타바토니체 루무조 아스 네타 타바자트 간디레즈네 이모체체레스.
So then, continuing down this outline, you have F1, the actual mind training and the practice of a person of the medium scope, which has 2 parts, recognizing the mind that expires to be liberated, and then the method to generate that mind. And so then, we're at the first part, recognizing the mind that aspires to be liberated. And the text says recognizing the mind, but really this section is like, what is this? What is liberation? What is this mind that aspires to be liberated?
Pena meji zenkono dayona, ne zenkono ne ta zenko cholotea jora, ne zenkono ne tarla res. Kamda tarbazade, and then on Kawalan Hade res. And then, because Indichene and the Legion rate on it, so Salomon to Tindiche, and Chunya legend and the Jiman Kawali Tarne, and that's Hanji Kompo Tabaz, Kawali Tarzatica resin, Kawali.
So, when we talk about liberation, what we can talk about, we can use the example, say, of a person in a prison, right? So the liberation is like someone's in a prison and then they escape from the prison, or they get out of the prison. That is often used as an example. And so that analogy here, then samsara, or korwa in the Tibetan, that samsara is our prison, right? And we are the prisoner. And so getting out of samsara is sort of being liberated. And so what really is imprisoning us, we would say, is our karma and our afflictions, and we get out of the prison through our practice. And so this escaping the prison of samsara is what we call tarpa, or liberation.
And 나좀 카와가 닐루 문이잖아만도 카와 네서 문이 다 마구나 는 카와 기본라고 지금 통돼 그래서 나가서 좀만 카와를 대대 카와 기본라고 지금 기본라고 되지 통돼.
Yeah, so if we don't really understand the nature of this prison, of the samsara, right, then we sort of mistakenly think that things are quite happy here. We sort of, oh, this isn't so bad. We're happy here, right? So then it's important to understand, the nature of samsara.
아니 카와가 닐루 문이 또 아니 카와 거기 주간디래. 아니 카와는 주부 간디요. 그래서 하주 잡사 야부 하구나. 아니 카와티 님보 메바. 아니 든디지 거제 처우요 사람도. 또 디부사는 카와티 기본다. 시라 칼레메. 이기와 치마 몸버설로 토마토 맨켄. 안다 기본다. 어때? 이철되요.
Yeah, and if you don't think a lot about future lives, then you're probably going to really think, oh, well, it's not so bad for much of our lives, right? For many of us, much of our lives, it's okay, right? We think it's kind of nice here. But if you really begin to understand, and Geshe didn't say essence really, he said like the way of abiding, like what is karma? How does karma, what is samsara? What is the korwa? Right? And so then if you want to understand what samsara is, you need to understand really what is the cause of samsara. Where does samsara come from? Oh, I have no idea what I wrote there. That didn't help at all. What did he say? He says you have to understand the nature of samsara, how karma is established, and how we get out. I say korma, how samsara is established, and how we get out of samsara, and sort of what the nature of it is. Otherwise, we'll mistakenly think it's okay.
And kitong aso no shoda to son korwa tenda anja with karija yorezena to setsine man nyarkap to shet setsira ma shet nyak tipol yoyo koni juma shene nga zonchi chimo zacha zonchi chimo de karla rezena zonchi chimo zacha nga so chuk chomba no le ya
water wheel.
kitong khwa
So the thing that I couldn't read is that also it's important to understand, like when we talk about samsara and the nature or the way of samsara abides, right? Samsara doesn't have any essence; it doesn't exist from its own side, right? So it's not established inherently. So through that we know it can change. That was what I couldn't read. And so when we talk about samsara, right? What's happening is that through all of these births, we're being born, we talk about there being the sort of the peak of samsara, which is the highest sort of realm, and then there's the lowest hell realms, right? And so we're being born over and over again, going up through these different levels and down up to these different higher rebirths and lower rebirths. And so there's the there's the example of a water wheel that sort of spins around and around and around. And so we're just sort of traveling through these different higher and lower rebirths like a water wheel in a cycle over and over again.
Koala 좀 몬토아드 카르라잖아. 단단가서 제보 디몬다 차팅 코ala 좀 두고 말했어. 즈부 디부 깡메가 니카서 수수 나차 디차치나 안은 저식 침보자 멤발라 테 카르체나 마페아체 켄산다 차 나차지나 니설로 돈티파 깡어셔보 딩어셔보 진요데 오탄 코아자텔리 터서나 기아치마 켈랭케지나 Koali Tarju Tabaji Matana, Montoni Tendijugana, Kalendu, Zeni, Sound Giachi. Yeah, Chama Kimalan Kajina, being a Shabon Tendita, Shinayasa Shesona, being a Mabanda Chan,
So, of course, when our lives are going well, we don't have a lot of problems, we tend to think samsara is pretty great, right? We think we're pretty happy, content with samsara. But when we begin to have illnesses or problems, like if we get cancer or we start to really have deep, serious problems, and life gets very hard, then if you're someone who believes in future lives, then you might really start thinking seriously about liberation, about samsara, about these kind of topics. If you're somebody that doesn't believe in future lives, then you might think, well, I should just kill myself and get it over with and get out of this suffering.
Pena ngaronda dibu tendete shushata tegmare sansala nasana kanga tete
So I, for example, like when everything's going well, I don't think that much about practice and dharma, right? It's not. But when I start to begin to have problems, then my mind really starts to focus on dharma and practice, and I think about it much more. That's how I am. Yeah. Anyone have questions? Anyone in the audience or online? Are you guys happy in samsara? How is samsara for y'all? Online, you guys, how's samsara going online there? Anybody? No? Okay.
네, 당아서 안커와라 균토와라 아니 니바 티키피 탈라니자 아니 둥어 담바토네 근존 담바라 사울루토 아니 텐데야라 체닝고네 사울루토 아니 사울루토 사니셰그도세
네네네. subject 나오나.
니바 티키피 탈라니
니바 티키피 탈. So when we talk about samsara and we want to understand the type of what samsara is, the suffering in samsara, then of course so understanding this nature of samsara, like the problem of samsara, we want to really think about from the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering and the truth of the cause of suffering, and also the 12 links of dependent origination.
네. 등어 담바군에 니모 사울치ton 켄조 담바군에 사울치ton 보라찬 티장다 네 동보 등어 담바셰 준세 칸디레즈네 네 타티마셰요레스 담바지그노네 동보 등어 담바셰라 티셰비 준세.
So then we talk about the Four Noble Truths. We often talk about the truth of suffering first, right? So then why we're going to talk here a little bit about why we talk about this Four Noble Truths, why we talk about the truth of suffering first among the Four Noble Truths.
아니 단다 주소 담바지도 텐데야라 체닐라 anga lojoche 텐데 제뉴스.
Have you studied the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent origination at all? Anybody? I think we have a tanka up there. Is it? No, it's not up there anymore. Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah, that has the 12 links kind of depicted. Yeah, anybody? Yes, a little bit? I know you must have.
몸보지 샤노마토 고카본더라 제년은 따우디본다 시아요. 아니 다 동부 등어 담바셰비 준세 동부 드데 토마스한테 담바나스 아니 다 동부 등어 담바트 간디레잖아. 그래서 토마메바는 거한 거 텐디 안다바 커데레니 다 등어자트 간디레스 네 딜스 토마 텐디 살루톤 과에서도 등어 담바셰그레스 이거는 아주 토마메 바는 거한 거 텐디 거그레스 아니 거한테 등어레 텐디레스 셰요라 텐디서 동부 등어 담바서 등어자트 간디레스 네 등어 담바셰그레스.
So when we talk about samsara, of course, we talk about having sort of cycled in samsara since beginningless time, and we talk about samsara, this being suffering, right? So one of the reasons we talk about suffering first, the truth of suffering first, is to explain what we mean when we talk about cycling and cyclic existence as being suffering.
아니 다 등어한테 간디레 텐디시 아주 등어 좋아티 아니 주칼린 조건도 네 등어 존토한테 간디레 살루톤 셰오티 네 니바 주컨존데바 등어 조사기 주데 컨존데바 네 니바 셰그레스.
And so then when we talk about, so we have the truth of suffering and then we have the truth of the cause of suffering, right? And so when we talk about suffering, right? And then we talk about, because we think, oh, there was suffering and that the cyclic existence is suffering. And then we want to understand, well, how does the suffering arise, right? What is the cause of the suffering? Where does the suffering come from? So then you talk about the cause of the suffering next.
아니 근조 담바자 띵아서 근조 들 간디요레자 네, 다 근조 담바니 저 하고라. ngaso dunga josa.
조로.
dunga josa somado ju 근조 담바니 chongres. 다 근조 담바자테 간디체레자 살로토테. 근조텔라 리지 근조토 뇨모 근조zen. 네, 니살로 통res.
So when we have the truth of suffering, which is sort of the nature of samsara, then we have the truth of the cause of suffering, and so this is in the Four Noble Truths, right? And so then what is this, the Gunjungi Dimba, right, which is the sort of the truth of the cause of suffering, right? So where does suffering arise from? So we talk about it arising from two things, from karma and the afflictions. So suffering, the cause of suffering, or the truth of the cause of suffering, we can say is karma and the afflictions.
Anita Lito Nyomo Nigene Juchene and Kinjo Demba, Jukinjo Tinti Shagres. Not a late country Shagres and Lisato the country Shagres and late Toma Mapi Danze. Danza Latene, Linda Mandasa, Nyomo Dramandakin, as on Tatene, as Dingan John Chiatone.
So, okay, so in the truth of the cause of suffering, we have karma and the afflictions. And so then where does karma come from, right? Well, karma comes from, the root cause of karma is this afflictive self-grasping, right? This sort of misperception, misconceiving of the way that we exist. Through that, the afflictions arise, and through the afflictions then we accrue karma. But what we would call the sort of primordial ignorance, the root problem is this dangzin, which is like self-grasping. It's translated as, it's like this afflictive view of the self, over reified view of the self. By the way, a point of translation, when we say truth of suffering, truth of the cause of suffering, it's not truth in the sense of it being a good idea. It's true in the sense that they are phenomena that exist that are apparent to Arya beings. That is the sense of truth and the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering. Ngay kung so di pakpe dimba shi di dimba di tunda jis di ngati jese gabi kangshan di inchi ke tok ne samsam kensar botong. It's true in the sense of being true for an Arya being. So it's an existent phenomena that an Arya being cognizes. That's the sense of it being true. It's not an idea, it's an existent phenomena.
Okay. Danze onge ngaso, angaso kanga ya jutesona, toma ju danze. Danze de shik chembo kasa shik chiya, tisaki nyomo tso, linga basa shik chiya ro. Ane danze shik chori rona, ne nyomo be lisa nyori ro. Tila tene, aso danze shichi chonge, li monyo sa, li yaso mombo sa, li yaso mombo la tene, aso kiwa yawa, kiwa digaze, kiwa yawa, kiwa digwaraza, o tila tene, aso kiwa le tonti tiras.
So self-grasping, which we call the primordial ignorance, this afflictive self-grasping, right? The stronger that is in our continuum, the more negative karma, and then the more afflictions arises. And then as the self-grasping is weakened, we have less of this. We're generating less negative karma. We're generating less afflictions. And so, independent on having more or less of this self-grasping, we have more or less afflictions and negative karma or positive karma. And then that then determines how we are reborn. So we have a better rebirth or a worse rebirth depending on how much or how little sort of self-grasping we have. Does that make sense? Does that come across? So if you have more self-grasping, you have more karma, more afflictions, and you have a negative rebirth. If you have, as you get less self-grasping, you're getting less negative karma, less afflictions, and you end up with a better rebirth.
Ane tanga so danze se ashi she de ore. Ta danze se ati meba zuwa la kanti gore se ne dame to bishera se ne de khate chi she. Ane dame ba to so na ane tanga so tende gopa se. Nyomo ma chipi gopa se. Gopa tha yore se. Gode. Tela tene nyomo pa meba chandro na ne gopi demba se. Tende iso sa la de she se ne gode se achi. tha yores ne tishegres.
So then we talk about self-grasping, and then how do we get rid of self-grasping? Well, we get rid of self-grasping through the emptiness, or the wisdom realizing emptiness, right? This is the direct antidote, the direct opposite, right? The opposing factor that actually gets rid of this afflictive self-grasping. And so then when we talk about getting rid of the afflictive self-grasping, that then leads us to what we would call the truth of cessation, right? Which is the truth of the absence of the self-grasping, right? So you've meditated on the wisdom realizing emptiness that is the exact antidote to this self-grasping, and then so then you get to the truth of cessation, which is the absence of that. And the truth of the path is what leads to the truth of cessation.
Ane godde zas tha yores. Tishesat ne godde zat kandi cheni thagres ne. Ne lauga ji thagres ne. Lauga nyawle ji tindi cheni godde zat tha yores ne. Ne laude thama shegres.
So we had truth of the suffering, truth of the cause of suffering, and we have truth of the cessation of suffering, and truth to the path to the cessation of suffering. So you have two cause and effects, right? So the truth of the cessation, right, we just talked about, we have the self-grasping, and you get rid of the self-grasping. The absence of that self-grasping is the gokden, is the truth of the cessation. Well, then the truth of the path, right, is how do you actually actualize getting rid of the self-grasping, right? So we said that the emptiness is the antidote, but actually doing it is the path, right? Actually getting to where you can create this effect is the path to this truth of the cessation. So the truth of the path is the cause of the truth of cessation.
Ani kito tanda demba jitana shepi ramba, lanyale ramba, kibi ramba zane, ramba mandra tindi shesa ramba ramo yores.
There's different ways of talking about the Four Noble Truths. You have the way that it's like sort of spoken. You have the way that it's actually generated in the person's continuum, and you also have the shepi ramba, kibi ramba.
Ani lanyale ramba.
And the Geberim lam deni ki kebariyeres. Geberim batang lam
nyole jeramba. Geberamba zana tombo denji ngaso ne kekar tombo jokenjo dembale ani jibu dingache. Ni laji dembala la nyole chene jibu ngode tha.
Okay. So there's the way that's sort of spoken order, I guess probably the way that it's taught. There's the way that it's sort of generated in samsara. We can talk about the Four Noble Truths in these different ways. And there's also, we can talk about Four Noble Truths in the order in which we actually practice them or actualize them from the perspective of a Dharma practitioner.
Ane, kitong aso demba jeza, demba zate, ngoyo nisa, tindijere. Ta ngoyo nisa te, kandi hakore zane, dana dengar papi demba, dana kenjo papi demba, dana ngopi papi, denji tishe ora. Te den hakon kete sore zane, tanda ngason kawala ni tindi chinge haku mares. Papa de soke ne nyomo kawala chonta nyomo po ne suzu jolon thola ta tindi chede ne kawi nyimu kandi ba to tindi soma hakwa is demba hakun kete sare papa de sare.
And so then when we talk about dinba, this idea of truth, who is it that knows this truth, right? What is this? Well, people that have had this direct realization, these Arya beings who have actually had these sort of direct realizations. Like, so us normal people, we don't actually directly understand. These are not truths for us in the sense that we don't directly cognize the Four Noble Truths. But Arya beings that have these great realizations, they are actually able to see directly the truth, like the dimba of these different statements.
Ani tanda ngason rechene demba Geshe, demba tindi reza she dera mato. Ani demba ngoni te kandi haku yo marela. Ani kawala ne dunga te she de yore, dunga chama cheje to dunga choma nyota yo mares. Tanda ngason kawala ne de yora, kawala dunga yore zedera. Ina tindi ngaso she na ta dibo choma she dera ma. Kawa ke dunga ngoni te kandi ji ba. Choma te tanda ngason nyota yo mares. Tanda ngaso kandi nyore Kabo nika dinga di nyo mato.
Kyap de biji di.
Chapa de che dinga mato. Dinga soma di nyo to ane demba reza ne dinga to tra ne tindi chena ne 디 덴바 야부 집어 요래서 시에 대마도 아좀 돌아도 팔아마다는 이게 대화도 간디면 뇨토고 말해서 나탄다 시야 자스레스.
So for us, of course, that have not achieved, the path of seeing, that are not Arya beings, like we are not really able to perceive, like the truth, everything that is suffering as this truth of suffering, right? So we're only able to perceive things that are suffering, that are very coarse suffering as suffering, right? But when we achieve, someday when we achieve, the path of seeing, right, then we'll actually be able to perceive all of these things that are suffering, that we're talking about as the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, actually as suffering. So when you're sort of looking at all the different teachings and texts and commentaries, right, if you don't understand the Four Noble Truths well, right, then you won't really understand the intent of all of these other things, right? So this is often why it's considered so important. This is, why the Buddha taught it first. Do you guys, anybody have questions? That was a lot. Anybody? Anybody online? Okay.
Nomba yezenke tane nonchunya le chenge yezenke mombu chila ane demba jeta ane tendayala cheni tonye topi tatiso chonjika saza tiso ngoche mombu chena tiso anjolon rokhapu tiso
tangbola
ton angatsu nomba ye nonchu chege yezenke mombu chora ina tiso la nonchu ngoche che mombu shete demba jeto tendayala cheni za ane tonye topi shera chonjika saza tiso mombu shena shirang nyeni zhugo yo marala tono yo maras ane nga songo koyi ane songa ka sheze de jin gyobu shibu 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 tili tono chinke moa yo.
So so lots of people, lots of people, of course, say, "Oh, I'm a Buddhist. I believe in Dharma or whatever." But when we start teaching things like the Four Noble Truths and the dependent origination and like emptiness and all all of these sort of important things, people get kind of bored and are not that interested, right, in these sort of subjects. But if people start teaching Tantra and give empowerments, then suddenly people are very excited and interested about it.
ane lapa songa nyale che ane nga sta katindi chena thoma ndola ane demba je gne chonche toni tiso ngipa lojo che mashi thama rachera
Mashi kan?
mashi thama jana te mashi na mandri khere ato tombone nga ta je pakat ta dibochi kadibochi njobon je she jana tindi pento ngone na tombo tiso lojo chacho che ane songa nyale che ne ramba chene.
So really, though, the thing is that if you want to practice things like Tantra and these higher practices, right, if you just go straight to those, you're not going to do any benefit, right? These other things like the Four Noble Truths, the dependent arising, emptiness, all of these things that we're talking about, the Lamrim here, right? These are incredibly important. Like this is the foundation that you have to go through step by step by step, and then when you've established these, then you're able to practice Tantra.
ina mombuchin jobu son jindone genza tombo ni ba samba la maza katu tokan shoni tu.
But of course lots of people sort of skip right through that and go right to the hardest, most difficult practices.
ane tandati denji dembaji jeton ko moche jeres ta ne bingwa dembaza de gandhi reze ne ja chapon ko ne rene ma moche che at le dos.
So this was just a very sort of broad overview, a quick overview of the order and the Four Noble Truths, and now we sort of go through them in much more detail, starting with the truth of suffering. What is the truth of suffering? Nobody? Questions? Anybody online? Questions?
Anita dunga demba savala ane tombon khawa chi dunga sambala sam ne dunga je samba dunga tru samba dunga sa samba ozen ne dunga sa tontelani sache tindisi dos.
So we are now at the bottom of page 79, the top of page 80 here. 1, contemplating the general suffering of cyclic existence, which has 3 parts. Contemplating the 8 sufferings, contemplating the 6 sufferings, and contemplating the 3 sufferings.
Anita dunga ge sambatila GBC dunga to cheba tataso injino ma ko lojan ra ningelento
Kyan kadu patu.
ningene GP ga ta dunga ge derendo tombo GBC dunga to chebas
So contemplating the suffering at the time of birth. So when you were born with suffering, possessing bad rebirth that itself leads to sickness, aging, mental afflictions, and death. So we must, I'm just reading from the text, we must consider how these two produce suffering, right?
GBC 등어식 첨보요바 이나요 GBC 아말로 등어식 첨보요래 이나 디마레스 수술이 등어요레스.
So when we talk about the suffering at the time of birth, what we're talking about here is one's own suffering, right? So you're being born and you're suffering through birth. Of course, the mother suffers a lot as well, but that's not specifically what we're talking about here.
아티 간지 하고셔라잖아. 다시 뛰어나시 쟁개도. 아니 전적고 수수 많이 멀더니 아니 마치티 소마든지 쟁개 미몽부요레스.
Oh, okay. So one of the ways that we know this, that we talk about this, is that there are people that actually remember this process, that are able to remember their past lives and can remember this process of birth. Of course, I don't remember mine at all. But the gebi dunga.
등어 심보요래서라.
공소도 튕기리네.
저저 아마 인원에 맞지디 등어요 봐줘서 이 차도 단단 요근도 스트레도
튕기듯. Yeah, so do you guys do you remember coming out of like being born? Like do you remember the experience of suffering when you were born, or anybody have any memories like that?
Yeah, 나마 땡케요.
Anybody remember previous lives at all? So where do your memories begin? Yeah, some people first year, second, third year, like what's the earliest? Yeah, maybe 3, I think, is my earliest memory.
Geshe.
I, for example, maybe about 6 years old. Yeah. Someone online. Oh, hey, Jennifer. What are you doing in
Hello, Geshe. Okay, so Geshe just asked, do we remember our previous life, right?
Yes.
I don't remember, but one time in my dream, in the dream, I remember that's the previous life. But then I don't know whether it's true or not, or just a dream.
Chitang kongi gewa nguma tingim de song. Ine thingma jik milam gi nangla di gewa nguma song. Yene yang di tenba thingune timba yeme kong hakogime song. Hakosong milam gi nangla di song. Kong song.
따뜻nga서
Yeah, so we can't, of course, we can't say if it's true or not, right? But this is something that happens. There are people that in their dreams do remember past lives. I mean, that is, there are many examples of that. So there's many examples. They've done a lot of research to Geshe Kempo Tsunju Loju did a lot of research and found like maybe 100 examples of people that had remembered their previous lives and went through and did a lot of research, interviewed them, right, and then went and sort of looked at the sort of the claims, and for example were able to go and verify that like the place they described was exactly the way that they were describing in their memories.
I remember my last life.
Oh wow. Kongi summa karisana kongi numagi ki gewate 총내 탕나 gepa partu kongidu sungsung.
알아.
Yeah, kongi parto sambidu. So you remember the bardo experience, the inter experience.
I remember the similar to Bardo
Mm.
and all brothers.
kongi di parto di kongi ki 총내 di gepa partu di pala kongi 장마 di kongidu sungsung.
알아. 기반에서 단답해.
나 말하면 총내.
알아.
정반에 di kongi 시내
음.
gepa partu. parsi.
알아.
Di parsi la kirvi de ma.
정네 니 단다 기야말레 퍼탈 퍼실라.
Di. kongi parsi chingidu sungsung.
아니 간지도 나서.
How was it? Yeah, tell us how it was. Tell us.
개만 가서
If you want to, yeah. If you want to, you don't have to, of course. But thank you for sharing that.
어떤 단다 가서 나라오지나 퍼시 시아데 정도 시자체니 시아 정도 좀 몸부터네 퍼시데 텐디레제 아마도 미가 무스 퍼시 텐디치레제네 단다 바다 시아 고마소스
Yeah, can I tend to put the
단다 가서 나라지나 퍼시자 텐디레제 정도 노리 시아제자체니 몸부터 대테마도 아니 미가 무스네 퍼센트와데 저라데 단다 바가 레제나 고마소스.
We have to understand that like the tradition takes these memories very seriously, right? Like it's like for Geshe, what he just said is I've only ever got to read about these in books, right? We read the texts that have these, that tell us about the bardo and stuff, but I've never met someone who actually had that experience. So I'm personally just clarifying that, right? Thank you for sharing that. The tradition really respects these kind of memories. It's not like we're laughing, but it's not like, oh, that's silly. It's actually something that's very...
네, 저를 시알 떠마디아도 텐디 고급 이 퍼시티 시알 떠마디아 또 디포메나스 야포메니 셴돈다메 텐디나 개용아 니버드 시고 말했어.
Yeah, if it's not easy to share, that's okay. You don't have to share it. It's like I said. Yeah, it's okay.
제라 지마 퍼시티 야포 신돈도스.
I would like to know because Geshe just mentioned about when our life, everything going well.
Yes.
We don't remember about practice.
Yeah,
But
that's
like for himself, something wrong, he remember. Oh,
probably I need to practice.
I should practice. So, what's his own experience for him? Or suggest us can remember to practice
I just fix that.
when everything's going well. For example, funny.
Let me translate that for much. Kongi tiwa karesana de kengi sumban nangshin anto debo yena di nyamlen chera samotang me. Yena yang di gangi jumna a ngan nyamlen chegore di nangshin di chuk ke chempore kengi sumban nangshin kengi nga zola di samchar di debo yena kanjis di nyamlen chea ki samot tang tupkire ki titinre ki tapyore. Yene kongi ki pe. Tanda pada hakoso.
So one funny example. When we finish one relationship, broke up with the partner, some people choose to go to the Dharma center like this. And when a new relationship
Start to
comes,
think they leave.
no time for the
Dharma
Dharma
center.
practice.
Yeah.
Time for date.
Dipe kongi be
So
karesana.
how can we remember?
It might not be his best example for him, but we'll. Odam kongi be karesana di ngatso ti mika sheti karo tangyam tu kareti jikna karo tangyam tu dena di nangchut sejasamo tangi yomare di chutok jogi yomare ine kinagi karo tangyam tu katelna lamsang adi nangchut nyamla chegore nangchut ki kareti tutuye dabo samo tangi yore. Dinje indu ngatso kanjis di debo yena kanjis nangchut samo tangi ye.
기도 가서 노출사로 통하라 아니 저거 디보도 통모 강음에 디위 건라 아니 추딩원이나 냐래자든지 문이잖아 된지야.
Dika go Yapo.
야셔들에서 이나요. 다 어떻게 유추살을다.
Utu.
우트즈는 강을 쳤든지 양타차데
Arere.
추살을다한테 야보레스.
야보.
이나 야셔데
Yeah.
강을 매비토
네.
가보냐도 참비 고이나다 수 강을 매비토는 슈딩은 주도는 선도잖아. 강을 매비토는 주도성 냐레지아레스. 이나 우트나 강을 셰비컬 추 냐레지아. 만드야 요마레스. 이나 람바니 바데레스. 람바 톰보티 네 데보 수즈부 톰보 강을 매비콜 추 냐레지아데 강아서 문이 세션 투자야. 오리지나자라 문이
So really, the truth is, right, when things are going well, this is when we really need to be practicing, right? This is really the best opportunity to practice when we're happy and things are going well and we're doing well. Then when we're sort of desperate, when we're sick, when we have like really difficult problems, of course, right, it's also good to practice then, but it's difficult to practice then, right? The time that we really should be practicing is when things are going well, when we have time, when we have health. Really, truly, that's actually the most important time to be practicing.
당은 충분히 다녀래 지야죠가 강남에 주부 통보도 디부 요비고라 네 주냐래 지야 소마디아셔레스 얘나요 다 어떤이 지야죠라 대원 링드 그래서 람바니바 람바세나 야셔도 통보도 지드니바데스.
Yeah, so basically the same thing, that really we have these two sort of opportunities or two stages, and that it's really the most important time, the best time, that really the best opportunity for us to practice is when things are going well, right? Because we have time, energy, ability, right? And when we're desperate, right? Because we're sick or having problems, of course, you still need to practice, but it's harder.
네, 단나가서 주부 디부도 통보 강남에 비콜 추냐래 지야 사울 가르 통거래잖아. 네, 딱이 공르셔봐. 거의 님도 지하메다. 어디서 사울시 친구 그래서 간주 몸보요나. 네, 수 강남에 등을 많이 오거네.
So like I said earlier, of course, the way to think about, the way to get your mind to think about Dharma when you're sick or when you're happy or when you're suffering, when you're not suffering and when everything is well, is like I said earlier, you have to think over and over again about the problems of samsara and death and impermanence, right? Really thinking about the faults of samsara and thinking about death and impermanence. That will motivate you when you're doing well. Otherwise, to really practice and study.
안녕하세요. 강어요 because 두분요 강어요 딘디카서 추트야티 가르치는 제가요래잖아. 내가서 대화는 더요래. 대화는 더요 말해. 딘디에서 다 대화도 하라가서 아니 수수 단다 코피잖아 가부냐도 카카트네 강한 체자 네 수수 나사나요. 강어 몸부시 트라오테 대화도 요래테니 대화접이 다시요 말해. 당아서 우토 당아서 살리시도 당어는 추지죠. 추들 레와잖아니 수수 강어세 네 수수 대화메 바스 아주 등함에 바스 차그래 되는 대화들이잖아니 추저요래서.
So when we're sick or when we're desperate, right, when we have real problems, of course, what's happening there is we very much want happiness and we want to get rid of suffering. And in that time, we don't have the ability to create happiness. So what we do is we turn to the Dharma as a way to really practice, hoping that this practice will help relieve our suffering, right? So we have this wish or this hope, right, that through this practice in that moment that we're suffering, that we'll actually be able to alleviate that suffering, right? So that's how we're motivated when we're sick, when we have problems to practice.
네, 요 몸부질라네 강아치비고 딱 강아시심보 어떠네. 네 추냐래제 추저 줄을 살로도 네 디제니티 라운드르지는 몬터네. 주바자도 추냐래제 딘디오 몸부래. 야, 요 가시 나이츠스 추제요. 마나이츠스 추무제요. 딘디오레요레.
So there are some people, of course, that have these big problems. They get really sick, and in that moment, they sort of turn to Dharma and they really start practicing Dharma. They start studying Dharma. They take Dharma very seriously, and when the illness is over, they continue that. They really continue practicing. But of course, there are also other people that while they're sick, they turn to the Dharma and practice Dharma, and then after they get better, right, they sort of it falls away. Anyone else have questions?
Yes, I have one.
So, for example, now we are talking about different difficult situations. So let's take that we are trying our best to behave the best and so forth, but like we feel that our environment is very difficult to accept. That we are trying our best, but all the time someone is trying to, how to say this,
create obstacles or hurt you.
To cheat us or try to gain over us and so forth. And so how to deal with a non-nice environment that we think is a non-nice environment. So how to deal with that.
공기티와 가르세나 디 Geshe di juba beyaku di tapse di chegi tapse chegi ininge kuyuki nang na di kuyuki yeyunki mi tetsu tingala di nuba chegi re tuk mambo chegi re tingala parte mambo sogi re dinjegi tungin gena kari chegi kangisanga nge juba nga kang tup di yapo chegi ininge yeyunki mi ngala di nuba chegi re di gange chegi re dinjegi kari chegi
당 문에는 중문이 냐려제 된데나 거의 되자 미 컨트롤 잡고 미 몸부 냐도 되네 아니 조바가 냐려제 그거 야셔도 되레 주다 바토니 나 주드라위자네 사토는도 잡고는도 너 kinke 전에매 된지네 근데 몸부지 대대나 너 kinke 수수고 주도 냐려제 두고요도 매 밀어 조바가 두고요도 매디 몸부지 하고요 말에 여기 그 삼번 돼야지 뭐 당연히 주바 예매도네 조바가 냐려 요매디 네 몬소년도 맞대 네 라만달랑게 야샤게 조구마레 자바레 야 디디 몸부 저 카테자 아니 조바가토나 아니 이춘냐는 뭐네 삼바 좀부지야데 이노 지야라마도 아니 지부데니 커초데 레콘라 삼바 좀부지야 냐레자 제토도 냐레바 몸부인데 요그레스 이나요 막 견성도 돌레체마도 아니 딜레체마도나 아니 상교안도
So really, of course, if you're in that situation where people are sort of harming you or hurting you or bothering you, or at least you're perceiving it that way, that really is this perfect opportunity to practice patience, right? This is really a great opportunity to practice. If you go up to the mountains where everything's quiet and peaceful and everything's happy and you're sitting there practicing, of course, you don't actually have this opportunity to do this kind of practice, to practice patience. So when you're in society, and you have all of these things around you that might be bothering you, that's actually a really wonderful opportunity to practice, particularly patience and these kinds of things, versus where if you just go where everything's nice and pleasant, then you don't have that same opportunity.
내가 좀 가라랑 인조께 자주라. 좀 가라 무슨지 강가 몸부지라 되네. 아니 이번 정거라마. 맞좀 가라 강가면 되면은
So when we talk about generating this mind that we call renunciation, which is, I don't like that translation, but the correct translation is sort of awkward. It's like this mind definitely to arise from samsara. So you can pick one or the other, right? But in terms of generating this mind, right, that's really important. If you're having lots of problems, that can become, cause. That's your opportunity to generate this mind, this conviction to arise from samsara. If everything is very happy and good, you don't think about that, right? You don't generate this mind.
When you say about patience, that is the best opportunity to practice patience. If you can give examples of how to practice patience, because usually what we think about patience is just not reacting. Then we just cultivate more anger and more resentment, like not speaking up. But so what exactly is patience? This is on the top of love and compassion. Then you practice patience. How give us please an example of proper practice patience?
I'm tired. You say it.
Ani di kuritis niema ina tu chado mena da so zopa ngemlen chetlinda ani di masasani zopa nyamlen chetsul tata pe na shia ani pe solo na ra kisa nam gyo matso chigira ina ani zopa se adi da kadu kate machiache ina yang kaduina samboda da tan controbom ani kunzin tagarande tagarandi zopa so tilga dirang marise so sami zopa ani zopa nyamlen kade tu chiche tan pe nune pe kayola yogi to tawa
yes. For example, like in a family, your parents are shouting to you in front of you. He's shouting, rah, 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 rah. What should I do to practice patience in front of angry parents?
아니 단단한 동부 비지시야 단다 존진을 아니 론지 시야야 가르라즈는 가서 선체무선 난까지 다티 몽부지요라 아수소를 자첸케도 니제 다 선체 라마를 수수 컨트롤롱게도 콘데게 요레스 니 당아 디소리리 메바주고도 제네 카테 자나 자차요 말레스 딜리 수수그 산데 송전 산데 바보야보야 이 산데 바보야보잖아 아니 왜 처음에 카테 자도 지바레스 그나 아니 사텐데는 고요스상 그나 가서 리콘 소마를 참마레 그디는 좋아지와 리콘 소마 참마레도스 아니 나테리 소마테니 고아크 요고도 되나 요아요 말레스 이 리콘 그 참마 소마그 수수 콤발라 소마도 모제이체다 수 콤발라 고아하지 게는도나 아니 단다 수 콤바 소마 그 말은 리소마 고아크 요고는 두고요 말레스 디노제 미 소마 드라곤 통텐데잖아 리리는 카테지 야레로나 노세가요 딜리 수수 산드소나 아니 당어요 말에서는 다티 존진이 시바데레스.
So when we think about the people around us, and there's going to be lots of different types of people, right? The people that are bothering us, that are neutral, whatever. We're surrounded by lots of people, and there will be lots of people that could potentially bother us, right? That we could perceive as enemies, right? Or just we could perceive them as bothering us, right? Well, you're never going to be able to actually. You can't stop that, right? You can't change them. You're never going to be able to actually fix all of those people. And so what you have to do actually is you have to really protect your own mind, or sort of take charge of your own mind, right? So what you have to do, like there's an example from the Bodhisattva's way of life, which talks about this idea that there's like a mountain of thorns, and you have to climb up the mountain of thorns, right? And you can never get enough leather to cover the whole mountain. So what you do is you cover your feet, and then you walk up it, which is the same thing as having fixed all of these thorns, right? So in that same way, if you are able to change your mind, to sort of take charge of your mind, then it's the same as if you've been able to sort of fix all of those people that are bugging you, right? There's also, I think there's a question online, but then I think the person isn't here, so I'm not sure.
근데 거기 들어와진도 자선으로 녀다는 게임이나 보이나 거기서 녀다 몸부 시에 수술 강아지 돼요라. 아til라 아니 동네 셋도데 논치노네 셋도잖아. 네 다카르레잖아. 고 녀다 셋도데 수선 다 감에셔서 코로로 강아지 요네 네 코녀다 주거리 시에그래서. 아니 요 디젠젤 살로타나네 코 뇨모시치 뇨모게 뇨모도 손에 딘디체라 딘디체아마토네 코즈 딘디체고아요 마레즈 코즈 니지도 샤사타네
오늘 되게 como 그것도 와서 그래.
페나타 노미키 뇨타 키메이나 부이나 네 뇨타 셰그라 뇨타 셰는 수수 컨트롤사그라 아텔 동라체스 노치는 셰테체나 아니 타코셰테 아캄 코르 카르체나 샤사 코르 니지라네 거리 뇨모도 손에 뇨모식 정도도 된정도 손에 아니 다 코로 컨트롤자 네 코로 컨트롤자 마세 코 컨트롤한테 나 컨트롤로네 소마마디아 찬도도 다 코로모네 컨트롤자고 하면도 고샤사 거리 마시도 마시병 것도 마르병 된디체 그래 되네 니징고네 살로 통사치래
네, 이거 무슨 오케이.
노치는
So, for example, like if you're among your family, your like cousins, aunts, whoever, whatever among your family, right? There's someone maybe gets angry or they get angry with you, right? And then if you get angry back, then you just sort of both, that just creates more problems, right? So instead of that, if you really understand that why are they getting angry? They're getting angry because they're under the control of these afflictions, and they're under the control of ignorance, right? And so through that understanding, then if you're able to sort of generate love and compassion instead of responding with anger in return, right? Then that's a much better way to respond.
And you damn penguin is a look on such that. Yeme in and a poo in and not as a Suzu Sembuzo, Katiti, Karas, Constantian, and the Corrigan and Rigorous. Corrigibuch, Corrigan, not as yet in the Chera, what's the Kibuch on and Rigorous, and the Chebamus. What's the Kajan and the Majana? Na, Emma meet Ronzares. Because of Chazibuzo, Tendichen and other no Kingama Mediga Chandro, because of no Kinami Yard, Chatindi. Ten디 차금 개차요 말했어. 배나
그래 동물이 뒤져 그래.
배나 다음에 봐자. 배나 그 제메도 보고서 노다시 텐디 제라. 텐디 제데. 근데 동부 가라서 걸어서 가라 제나체. 걸어서 지나 걸어서 해보죠. 걸어서 텐디 지 걸어서 강함에 봐 차서는 는준도 그래서 걸어서. 근데 나 콜라자잖아 배그 말해서 공알 사야란서 그래. Kupan Dumodu Chesozana, Diri Dura. Ili Kondo John Taresin. A Corrice, Carisiana Siena, Nalchebaka Maris. Konga Dichare, Konga Dumudu Carlandana, Nangamak meet Ronjares. Good Ramanda Chenga, Yarin Droato.
You need them, but they do.
Not Dirin Drakayo Maris. Tangal Salutons the Chevre. Na, Emare, and not the Surrezet. And Penanga into Yarin into Yapures and Yarin Drata into Dichares and Dirin Draka. Not into Ronas. And Anga Nazanga Sachimbus, Nakondruza Columondria, Jaguamontus, Naza at the Sures. And the Tigun is solid, Damet, not the Sure, Daz at the Sure. Another Sachimbus said there you're again. I sure, not that you could be just a cat. And it is so
you also can think about sort of selflessness or emptiness, this lack of this like over-reified self, right, when this happens, right? If somebody's getting angry with you or bothering you or annoying you, right? Of course, if you just respond back with anger, then the situation just gets worse and worse and worse, right? So what you can do instead at that point is really think, oh, I'm not going to respond that way. I'm not going to do that. And you can really examine the self that is responding, right? Like examine that self. Where does that self exist? How does that self exist? You know, that self doesn't exist super solidly, right? You can use that as an opportunity to really examine how the self actually exists, you know, and so you can use that to understand selflessness. I don't think Suruda, I don't think, you're not on here anymore, are you? I think she's gone, so we won't answer that question. Okay, I think that's kind of, yeah. All right, Taruna, I'm sorry about the questions. We'll try in the future to remember maybe when people ask questions to pass them one of the mics so you guys can hear, or I'll at least try to remember to repeat the question so you guys can hear them better. Okay, thanks everybody.
Geshe, Tujina, Andrew, thank you.
I'm going to give you an example. I went to Delhi. I went to Delhi for some work. Yeah. I went over to a lot of people were coming for His Holiness. Like it sounds like a big group was coming, and I went to go help them.
kozo jaga Geshe umare Nepal ni yale.
Oh, the Sadhu Jumkin. Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is when a bunch of refugees from Tibet had come over and were coming into India for the first time.
Kozo Nepal jene basan Delhi le. Ane nga roba jere ngani Delhi kozo sena buku Nepal basan ni sale. Ane nje kozo kozo jene kozo pesha de so. 네, 다 나르는 거네. 파산한다 고솔로 로바세.
네네네.
이나 메모버지가는 그 바스는 갑자기 그래서 처리 제근도. 아니 배산 소금문도. 네, 대사야 보면. 아니만이 사정 아빠. 너다 정주시했어.
So I was in Delhi and I went to Delhi to help. So there used to be like thousands of, people coming over from Tibet into Nepal and into India, and then it would arrive at these sort of welcome centers in Delhi and different places where all these refugees would arrive. And so I went there, Geshe, I went there to work and to volunteer to help these people. And so I really was very excited. I really wanted to do a good job. We would get them, they would arrive, and we would give them some money and housing and help them. And but the problem is, of course, then all of these people many people would start complaining, oh, the housing is terrible, you're not giving us the right amount of money, we don't like the food. So would start complaining about everything.
아니 센조 뭐 자니 야야만도 레칼레데라. 근데 아니 수수 니카라문도 아니 고조 녀다 시에근도
수수기 닌카.
말해 수수 딱갈레 뭐 버전 살아도 니카라.
Oh, niku. Oh, yes, I would work so hard I would not even get to sleep. And people are constantly complaining. People will call me like a thief, saying I wasn't giving them all the money I was supposed to give them. Yeah. So some people would say, oh, I'm giving them better things than me, or I'm playing favorites, right? And so slowly. So at one point I got just really worked up. I had a real big problem. Yeah, I don't think I can do this work because I'm so frustrated with these people.
tikon Geshe ga yomare tinde de kotsolo kanga ji yores koso kare lana las ngaro ligya de kotsolo yama nili chia tere ani pesa siste go ate koso ngal kumala na ani tomu chia ndu mundu lana kare lana de ngaro ligya de koso pesa te yama nili chia tinde ja tangone koso kayo mare kotsolo kanga ji yore ma koso kanga ji mena kala nyota se ra tindi salon rich tong ani da nis der tijini kozo kase nyota se kase kale chona mu they got land.
So finally one night I was able to change my thinking, right? I really realized, like, hey, these people have come, they had a really hard road, it was very difficult, they've come here, they don't, they maybe don't have family, they don't have money, they don't speak the language, right? It's really difficult for them. And so really, what is my job? My job is really just to hear and help them and give them money and do these things, right? And it doesn't matter what they say. If they're going to complain to me, right, it doesn't actually matter to me. I should just be here to do this work. And so I was able to really just change my thinking, and so that my thinking, didn't depend on them appreciating it or whatever, that I was able to do that. And so then through changing my thinking, I was able to stay there. I stayed there for 2 months, and I did this work, and after that it was fine.
Dibu Queensland Saloma de Shikolas. Yenayota, Salut, Kayo Maris, Koso, Corso Masio, Corso of Kangachiano, Tangal Catalana, Chapel, Tele, Salut,
So first, right, when they would say, oh, you're a thief, you're a liar, you stole our money, right, and for me as a monk, that kind of thing would be really a serious offense, right? So I of course, would get really angry, get really frustrated, and that wasn't very good. But then eventually, after that, when I was able to really believe and understand, we're running out of batteries, believe and understand it wasn't their fault, like that wasn't their fault, right? Then I was able to really change my mind, and then after that, my mind was very relaxed.
네, 저도 녀탐 뭐 메요 아티카라 미치가 알체 라마라라나 야셔티로 파 조바 가마토나 살로 콘도자나 파 레마자 콘 레마자 니 티스토냐자 노메자 타타나 이거 펜토 첨보요 파질라 사질라 네 콘도 시시리 미디나 시시리 콘도 살로 콘도 자나요 레마자 콘도 존 파레즈 티 타시토나
So even if you're not able to do this, not able to really not get angry in return, if you're able to at least not respond with anger, right, not say something in return with anger, that also still has great benefit because you don't start making things worse and worse and worse. So even if you're not able to totally change your mind so that the anger isn't bothering you, if you can just not respond in anger, right, that also is of great benefit. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody.